A wise ruler must understand this fundamental truth, that men are ungrateful, fickle, false, and driven by their own advantage. While they may speak of loyalty and affection, they are bound by such sentiments only so long as it serves their interest. Love is a bond that men will sever the moment it ceases to please them. But fear is a chain forged in steel. Therefore, I say, it is safer for a prince to be feared than loved, when he must choose between the two. For love depends upon the goodwill of others, a volatile and uncertain thing. But fear resides within the prince's own dominion, and thus can be summoned at will. Men love at their convenience, but they fear according to necessity. Yet, let the prince be cautious. He must never inspire hatred. Fear without hatred is the mark of true command. Let punishments be swift and just, never cruel for cruelty's sake, but delivered so that order is preserved and rebellion deterred. In times such as these, when order falters and confusion reigns, a wise man would do well to heed these lessons. And if wisdom is what you seek, then I say this to you now: subscribe to this channel. For here we do not flatter illusions, we unveil the truth, as it has always been known to those who understand power. Do not be as the masses, who forget what they ought to remember. Be as the prince, prepared, discerning, and ever watchful. The next lesson awaits, and you would be wise not to miss it. You believe we have evolved beyond the primitive laws that governed our ancestors, that in our gleaming towers of steel and glass, in our orderly societies with their carefully written rules, we have somehow transcended the brutal simplicity of nature's first command: the strong survive, while the weak perish. This illusion comforts you, but comfort is the enemy of survival. Look closer at your civilized world. Strip away the polite fictions we craft to disguise the truth. In every boardroom, every political chamber, every crisis that threatens to shatter our fragile peace, what do you see? The same eternal dance of predator and prey, of dominance and submission, of power taken and power lost. A CEO does not ask permission to eliminate his rivals. He strikes when they are vulnerable, absorbs their resources, expands his territory, just as a lion does not debate the ethics of his hunt. He simply kills, because that is the law of his nature, and nature's law supersedes all others. Times of crisis. Watch how quickly your neighbors shed their civilized masks. When resources grow scarce, when fear grips the heart, when the old order crumbles, do they share out of love? Do they sacrifice for the common good? No, they hoard. They protect their own. They follow the ancient law that never truly left us: survive at all costs. This is not cynicism, this is clarity. And clarity is the first weapon in your arsenal. Consider the fate of those who forgot this truth: the ethical business leader who believed in fair competition, only to watch his empire dismantled by more ruthless competitors; the compassionate politician who extended trust to his rivals, only to find himself betrayed and discarded; the democratic crisis leader who sought consensus while decisive action was needed and lost everything to those who dared to seize command. Power is not shared, it is taken. This law operates whether you acknowledge it or not. Every system, every organization, every human group will eventually produce its apex predator. The only question is, will you be the predator or will you be the prey? Some will call this view dark. They are the same ones who will be swept aside when darkness truly falls. Because in those moments, when the power goes out, when supply chains snap, when the thin veneer of civilization peels away, the law of the jungle returns in full force, and only those who understood it all along will be prepared to survive. You see it already if you dare to look. The way nations stockpile weapons while preaching peace. The way corporations speak of cooperation while maneuvering for monopoly. The way even in your own life, in your own small sphere of influence, every advantage must be guarded, every position must be defended, every gain must be protected, with the implicit threat of force. This is not a call to cruelty. The truly powerful lion does not kill needlessly, waste of energy, waste of resources. But he never forgets what he is. He never apologizes for his strength. He never pretends that the gazelle is his equal in nature's grand design. So, I ask you now, what are you? Are you the lion who embraces his nature? Or are you the gazelle who dies believing in a gentler world that never existed? The law of the jungle still rules, not because it is right or wrong, but because it is. Those who master this truth become masters of their fate. Those who deny it become victims of their own delusions. Choose wisely. For in the end, nature herself does not care about your choice. She only records the results: survival or extinction, dominance or submission, power taken or power lost. This is the first lesson. And if it unsettles you, good. Comfort is the enemy of survival, and I am not here to comfort you. I am here to ensure you survive. There is a persistent myth that corrupts the minds of would-be leaders. It is the belief that men can be governed based on what they ought to be, rather than what they are. This delusion has toppled kingdoms, destroyed empires, and led countless rulers to their doom. Let us speak plainly about human nature. Men are inherently selfish creatures. This is not a moral judgment. It is a simple observation, as neutral as noting that water flows downhill. Their first loyalty is to themselves, their second to their immediate family, and a distant third to whatever group identity temporarily serves their interests. You've seen this truth play out in your own life, though perhaps you've denied it. Watch how quickly lifetime friendships dissolve over inheritance disputes. Observe how work colleagues of 20 years will sacrifice each other for a promotion. Notice how neighbors who shared holidays together will turn hostile over property line disputes. These are not aberrations. This is human nature revealing itself when tested. In times of plenty, men can afford the luxury of appearing selfless. They donate to charities, volunteer for causes, speak endlessly of sacrifice for the greater good. But watch what happens when resources grow scarce. The mask of civilization slips and the true face emerges, calculating, self-interested, focused purely on survival. This is why great leaders throughout history have succeeded not by appealing to humanity's higher nature, but by understanding and harnessing its base instincts. They knew that men will follow not because of abstract principles, but because following serves their personal interests. Consider how short-sighted most men are in their pursuits. They will sacrifice long-term security for immediate pleasure. They will destroy valuable alliances for momentary advantage. They will undermine their own future to satisfy present desires. This is why they need leaders. Not to change their nature, that is impossible, but to impose a structure that channels their selfish impulses toward productive ends. You see this dynamic in every successful organization. The military does not expect soldiers to fight for abstract patriotism. It creates a system where personal survival depends on unit cohesion. Corporations do not expect employee loyalty. They align individual compensation with company success. Effective leaders do not expect selfless devotion. They make it personally costly to disobey. Some will call this view cynical. They are the same voices that advocate governing by inspiration, leading through love, building organizations on trust and shared values. And they will be betrayed again and again by the unchanging reality of human nature. The wise leader understands that men will follow their interests first, their fears second, and their principles last. He does not waste energy trying to change this eternal truth. Instead, he crafts systems that make loyalty profitable and betrayal expensive. This is not to say that men are incapable of noble actions. They are. But these moments are like lightning. Strikes, brilliant, powerful, and rare. You cannot power a city with lightning. You cannot build a lasting order on the assumption that men will consistently act against their nature. So I say to you now, Cast aside these comfortable illusions about human nature. See men as they are, not as you wish them to be. Their selfishness is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a tool to be used. Their short-sightedness is not a weakness to be lamented. It is a lever to be pulled. Only when you embrace this truth can you begin to lead effectively. Only when you understand human nature in its raw, unchanging form can you shape it to your purpose. For in the end, the greatest power lies not in trying to change what cannot be changed, but in understanding how to use what will always be. There are those who would tell you that a leader can be both feared and loved, that these two forces can exist in perfect balance, creating an ideal form of authority. These voices speak from inexperience, from theory rather than practice, from wishes rather than wisdom. Let us explore why this balance is not merely difficult. It is impossible. Imagine two rulers. The first is loved by his people, but not feared. They praise his kindness, celebrate his compassion, speak warmly of his gentle nature. The second is feared, but not loved. His decisions are swift, his punishment certain, his authority unquestioned. Now imagine a crisis strikes. Resources become scarce. Order begins to fray. Watch what happens to these two rulers. The beloved leader's subjects will turn on him the moment their comfort is threatened. Their praise will turn to blame, their warmth to resentment, their loyalty revealed as shallow self-interest. Because love, in politics, in business, in any system of power, is conditional. It lasts only as long as it serves the interests of those who profess it. But the feared leader's position remains secure. His subjects may not love him, but they know the cost of defiance. Their obedience does not depend on their mood, their comfort, or their fleeting emotions. It is anchored in something far more reliable, the certainty of consequences. Some will say, but surely we can inspire both fear and love. Surely we can be tough when needed, gentle when possible. This is the voice of compromise, and compromise in matters of power is the first step toward losing it. Because fear and love operate on fundamentally different principles. Love requires consistency in kindness. Each harsh action erodes it. Fear requires consistency in strength. Each gentle action undermines it. They are like two opposed magnetic fields, each weakening the other. Consider a parent who tries to be both feared and loved equally by their child. One moment they enforce discipline, the next they seek to be a friend. What is the result? A confused child who learns to manipulate these shifting states, who neither truly respects nor truly loves the parent. The same principle applies to all leadership. Your subordinates, your followers, your people. They must know exactly what to expect from you. Uncertainty breeds contempt. Inconsistency invites challenge. This is why the wise leader chooses fear, not because it is pleasant. It is not. Not because it is easy. It requires constant vigilance, but because it is reliable, because it puts power where it belongs, in your hands, not in the fickle emotions of others. But understand this clearly. Choosing fear does not mean choosing cruelty. Cruelty is the tool of the weak leader who does not understand the difference between fear and hatred. Fear can be clinical, professional, impersonal. It can be as simple as the certainty that failure will have consequences, that disloyalty will be punished, that challenges will be met with overwhelming force. Think of the most effective organizations you know. The military does not run on love. High-performing companies are not powered by affection. Elite units, whether in combat or commerce, are not held together by warm feelings. They are bound by something stronger, the fear of failing, the fear of being excluded, the fear of losing what they have fought to gain. So I say to you, reject the false choice. Stop trying to be both feared and loved. Choose fear, not because it is perfect, but because it is reliable. Choose fear, not because it is pleasant, but because it is effective. Choose fear, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. For in the architecture of power, it is better to build with steel than with silk. And fear is the steel that holds when all else fails. Understanding the psychology of power requires us to strip away comfortable illusions and examine the raw mechanics of human loyalty. Today we will explore a fundamental truth: why love in leadership is a debt you can never repay, while fear is a wall that protects your authority. When you lead through love, you enter into an unspoken contract with your followers. Each kind act, each show of generosity, each moment of compassion, these are not gifts, they are debts, and your followers keep a meticulous accounting. Think of how quickly a lifetime of generosity can be erased by a single moment of refusal. Consider how years of support can be forgotten the instant you cannot provide what others feel entitled to receive. This is the trap of leading through love. You must continuously pay dividends on an ever-increasing emotional debt. But fear? Fear is different. Fear does not create debt. It creates boundaries, clear, unmistakable lines that separate authority from submission, command from compliance, power from weakness. A wall does not need to justify its existence. It simply stands, and by standing, it defines space. Let me show you how this operates in practice. A leader who rules through love must constantly prove their worthiness to be loved. Each decision must be explained, each action justified, each choice defended against the emotional expectations of their followers. It is exhausting, and more importantly, it is dangerous. Because the moment you cannot meet these expectations, and such a moment always comes, the love transforms into resentment. But a leader who rules through fear, they need only maintain the wall. Their decisions do not require emotional justification. Their actions do not need to meet the approval of their followers. The wall of fear, once erected, stands on its own strength. Consider how this manifests in crisis situations. When resources are scarce, when hard choices must be made, when survival depends on swift and decisive action, what serves you better? The emotional debt of love which your followers will demand you repay at the worst possible moment, or the wall of fear, which stands strongest precisely when chaos threatens? Some will object, but fear creates resentment too. This misunderstands the nature of fear as a tool of leadership. We are not speaking of terror, of arbitrary cruelty, of the fear that breeds desperate hatred. We speak of the professional fear, the organized fear, the fear that comes from knowing that actions have consequences and authority has teeth. Think of how the most effective organizations operate. A soldier does not obey orders because he loves his commanding officer. He obeys because the consequences of disobedience are clear, swift, and certain. A corporate executive does not meet deadlines because of affection for the CEO. She meets them because failure carries a price she cannot afford to pay. This is the wall of fear in action. It does not require emotional maintenance. It does not create escalating debts. It simply stands defining the boundaries of acceptable behavior through the certainty of consequences. Remember, love in leadership is like a loan with compound interest. Each kind act increases the expected return. Each gesture of generosity raises the cost of future denials. The debt grows until it becomes unsustainable, until the moment when you cannot pay what is demanded, and then love reveals itself as the fair-weather friend it has always been. But fear? Fear is the wall you build once and maintain through consistency. It does not grow more demanding over time. It does not require constant emotional investment. It stands through storm and calm alike, protecting your authority through the simple, implacable promise that actions have consequences. So I say to you, stop trying to earn love you can never fully repay. Build instead the wall of fear, not through cruelty but through consistency, not through terror but through the quiet certainty that your authority has teeth. For in the architecture of power, it is better to be the wall that stands than the debtor who must forever pay. Let us dissect the nature of obedience, not as moralists who judge it, but as surgeons who seek to understand its essential structure. For in this understanding lies the key to wielding power effectively. Obedience is not a simple reflex like pulling your hand from fire. It is a calculated decision made in the deep chambers of the mind, where survival instincts wrestle with personal desires. Understanding this calculation is crucial for anyone who seeks to command. Picture two scenarios. In the first, a subordinate obeys because they believe in your vision, admire your character, feel emotionally invested in your success. In the second, they obey because they have made a cold assessment of the consequences of defiance and found those consequences unacceptable. Which form of obedience survives a crisis? History provides our answer. Look at any successful power structure that has endured through chaos, military hierarchies, criminal organizations, ancient dynasties that survived centuries of turmoil. None of them relied on emotional loyalty. All of them built systems where the cost of disobedience was clear, consistent, and unavoidable. This is the first principle of command. Obedience based on calculation is more reliable than obedience based on emotion. Consider how this manifests in practice. When a military commander gives an order, the subordinate's mind performs an instant calculation, the certainty of punishment for disobedience weighed against the uncertainty of benefit from defiance. If the commander has built proper systems of control, this calculation always produces the same result. Obedience is the safest path. But when a leader relies on emotional loyalty, the calculation becomes muddied with feelings, with personal interpretation, with the subordinate's own assessment of whether they still believe in or feel aligned with the leader's vision. This is quicksand on which to build authority. The second principle, fear must be institutional, not personal. Many fail to grasp this distinction. They believe that fear means making people personally afraid of you as an individual. This is the mark of an amateur. True power builds systems where fear is built into the structure itself, where consequences flow naturally from actions, where disobedience carries an institutional rather than a personal price. Think of how the most effective organizations operate. In a well-run corporation, employees don't fear the CEO as a person. They fear the loss of position, status, and resources that disobedience would trigger automatically. In a proper military unit, soldiers don't fear their commander personally. They fear the systematic consequences of breaking the chain of command. This leads us to the third principle. Obedience must be habitual, not conditional. Your authority cannot depend on your subordinates' continuous reassessment of whether to obey. It must be built into their mental firmware, a baseline assumption as natural as gravity. This comes from consistency, the absolute certainty that every act of defiance, no matter how small, carries consequences. Consider the parent who sometimes punishes misbehavior and sometimes ignores it. Their child learns not discipline, but calculation. When can I get away with defiance? But the parent who responds to every transgression with measured, predictable consequences, their child learns that disobedience itself is costly, regardless of circumstance. The fourth principle, the consequences of disobedience must be predictable, but not cruel. Cruelty in punishment is the tool of weak leaders who don't understand power. It breeds resentment, creates martyrs, and gives subordinates moral justification. For rebellion, true power doesn't need cruelty, it needs consistency. The consequence should be like gravity, impersonal, unavoidable, and exactly proportional to the offense. Finally, understand this. True obedience is not about making people do what you want. It's about making them understand, on a bone-deep level, that cooperation with your authority is their best path to personal survival and success. This is why fear works better than love. Love requires them to value your success above their own. Fear simply requires them to value their own success, and then shows them that their success depends on their obedience. So I say to you, Study the anatomy of obedience. Understand its calculations. Build systems that make those calculations simple and inevitable. For in the end, sustainable power comes not from inspiring obedience, but from making disobedience unthinkable. There is a poison in modern leadership thought. It masquerades as wisdom, presents itself as enlightenment, and spreads like a virus through organizations, destroying their capacity for decisive action. This poison is the doctrine of gentle leadership. You know the tenets of this false gospel. Lead with kindness. Build consensus. Avoid confrontation. Make everyone feel heard. Create safe spaces for dialogue. Encourage vulnerability. These ideas sound noble. They feel progressive. They seem humane. They are a path to ruin. Let me show you what happens to organizations that embrace this delusion. Watch how they become paralyzed by endless discussion, weakened by constant compromise, and ultimately destroyed by their own inability to act decisively when circumstances demand it. Consider the modern corporate environment. Companies pride themselves on their collaborative culture, their flat hierarchies, their emotional intelligence. They replace command with consultation, authority with accessibility, decisive leadership with democratic dialogue. And what is the result? Projects that should take weeks stretch into months as every stakeholder must be consulted. Every opinion must be heard. Every feeling must be considered. Difficult decisions are delayed or diluted because no one wants to be seen as aggressive or authoritarian. Critical changes are abandoned because they might make some people uncomfortable. This is weakness masquerading as virtue. The truth, the hard, unchanging truth that your gentle leadership professors never taught you, is that organizations need hierarchy, like a body needs a spine. Without it, they collapse into formless mass, incapable of coordinated action. Think of any crisis situation you've witnessed. When the building is burning, do you want a leader who ensures everyone's feelings are validated? When the company is bleeding money, do you need someone who prioritizes emotional safety over survival? When crucial decisions must be made in moments, is consensus your ally? The gentle leadership doctrine fails precisely when leadership matters most. Some will object, but harsh leadership creates resentment. It damages morale. It makes people feel undervalued. These objections reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of what leadership is for. Leadership exists not to make people feel good, but to ensure survival and success. A surgeon is not gentle with a tumor. A general is not gentle with an enemy. A captain in a storm is not gentle with the elements. And a leader, a real leader, cannot be gentle with threats to their organization's survival. This does not mean being cruel. Cruelty, like gentleness, is a weakness in leadership. It means being clear, decisive, and uncompromising in the pursuit of necessary goals. It means making decisions that serve the organization's survival, even when, especially when, those decisions make people uncomfortable. Look at history's most effective leaders. They were not remembered for their gentleness. They were remembered for their clarity of purpose, their decisiveness in action, their unwavering commitment to their goals. They understood that leadership is not a popularity contest. It is a responsibility that sometimes requires choosing between being liked and being effective. The gentle leadership doctrine is particularly dangerous because it appeals to our desire to be seen as good people. It offers the seductive promise that we can have power without the burden of hard choices, authority without the weight of responsibility, leadership without the cost of being feared. This is a lie. Real leadership carries a price. It requires you to be willing to be disliked, to be called harsh, to be accused of being old-fashioned or autocratic. It demands that you value effectiveness over popularity, results over feelings, survival over comfort. So, I say to you, cast off this gentle leadership delusion. Understand that your role is not to be liked, but to be effective, not to comfort, but to direct, not to soothe, but to succeed. For in the real world, the world of competition, crisis, and survival, the gentle leader is like a sheep trying to lead wolves, and the end is always the same. The sheep is devoured, and the wolves follow whoever proves strongest. There exists a critical distinction that separates masters of power from its clumsy wielders, the difference between being feared and being hated. This distinction is not academic. It is the razor's edge on which authority either balances or bleeds. Let us first understand fear in its proper form. Fear, when properly instilled, is like the respect one has for fire. You do not hate fire for its ability to burn. You simply acknowledge its power and adjust your behavior accordingly. This is the type of fear that sustains authority. Hatred, however, is a poison that corrupts power from within. It is personal, emotional, vindictive. It creates not subjects, but enemies, not subordinates, but saboteurs. A leader who is hated sleeps lightly, trusts no one, and eventually falls. To the very forces their cruelty has created, consider two types of commanders. The first rules through arbitrary cruelty. He punishes randomly to display his power. He humiliates subordinates to prove his dominance. He creates elaborate torments to showcase his authority. He is hated, and this hatred becomes the seed of his destruction. The second rules through predictable consequence. Transgressions are met with measured response. Punishments fit crimes. Authority is exercised not for personal pleasure, but for organizational necessity. He is feared, and this fear becomes the foundation of his strength. The key difference lies in the perception of justice. When your subordinates perceive that punishments are just, even if severe, they fear your authority, but do not hate your person. They understand the rules of the game, even if those rules are harsh. This understanding creates stability. But when punishments are arbitrary, when cruelty serves no purpose beyond displaying power, when suffering is inflicted for its own sake, this breeds the type of hatred that outlives fear. And hatred, unlike fear, is patient. It waits, it remembers, it finds its moment. Think of the most effective power structures in history. The Roman Empire at its height did not maintain control through random cruelty. It established clear laws, predictable punishments, systematic consequences. Citizens feared the power of Rome but did not uniformly hate it because they understood its rules. This principle applies at every level of leadership. In a corporate environment, the executive who punishes failure with immediate termination is feared, but not necessarily hated. The rules are clear. But the executive who plays favorites, who punishes arbitrarily, who uses power to satisfy personal vendettas, they create not fear, but hatred. In a military unit, the commander who enforces discipline strictly but fairly generates fear-based respect. But the commander who abuses power for personal entertainment, who creates unnecessary hardship to prove dominance, they breed hatred that undermines unit cohesion. Even in family dynamics, the parent who establishes clear boundaries with consistent consequences creates healthy fear. The parent who punishes randomly, who uses authority to vent personal frustrations, they create lasting hatred that destroys family bonds. This leads us to a crucial principle. Fear should be systematic, not personal. Your subordinates should fear the consequences of defiance, not you as an individual. They should fear the loss of position, privilege, or resources that comes with disobedience, not arbitrary punishment born of personal malice. This distinction becomes most critical in times of crisis. When your authority is challenged, when resources are scarce, when survival depends on absolute control, fear will hold your power structure together, but hatred will tear it apart. So I say to you, learn to generate fear without spawning hatred. Understand that your authority should be like gravity, an impersonal force that operates by clear rules. Let your subordinates fear the consequences of defiance, but never give them reason to hate you personally. For in the architecture Of power, fear is the mortar that holds the structure together. Hatred is the crack that eventually brings it down. In times of abundance, when resources flow freely and threats seem distant, many leaders indulge in the luxury of soft power. They speak of influence rather than authority, persuasion rather than command, inspiration rather than control. This approach appears enlightened, progressive, humane. Then crisis strikes, and soft power evaporates like morning dew under a harsh sun. Understand this fundamental truth. Soft power is a fair-weather friend. It functions only when your followers have the luxury of choosing to follow. The moment that choice becomes costly, the moment survival requires sacrifice, the moment hard decisions demand immediate compliance, soft power reveals itself as the illusion it has always been. Consider what happens in real crisis situations. When resources become scarce, does inspirational leadership fill empty stomachs? When threats loom immediate, does collaborative decision-making stop the enemy? When time runs critical, does building consensus save lives? No. In these moments, the moments that define survival, only hard power proves reliable. Look at how this principle manifests across different scales. In a corporate crisis, the CEO who built their authority on being liked, on fostering a family atmosphere, on prioritizing emotional comfort, they find themselves paralyzed. Their attempts to maintain harmony prevent necessary cuts. Their desire to be understood slows crucial decisions. Their fear of appearing harsh weakens their ability to take decisive action. In a military unit under fire, the commander who relied on friendship rather than discipline, on motivation rather than training, on team spirit rather than clear hierarchy, they watch their authority evaporate precisely when it matters most. Because soft power requires good conditions to function, and combat is never good conditions. Even in family dynamics, parents who built their authority purely on being friends with their children, who avoided establishing firm boundaries, who prioritized being liked over being respected, they find themselves helpless when real challenges emerge, because children, like all humans, require clear authority most when circumstances are hardest. This is why crisis becomes the ultimate test of leadership models. It strips away pretense. It reveals the true foundation of authority, and soft power, when tested by real pressure, consistently fails this test. Some will object, but soft power creates loyalty. It builds trust. It motivates people to give their best. These objections reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature under pressure. When survival is at stake, humans don't need motivation. They need direction. They don't need emotional support. They need clear command. They don't need to trust you as a friend. They need to know you can keep them alive. This is why military training strips away soft power entirely. It builds systems of hard authority, clear hierarchy, and immediate consequence. Because these systems work precisely when they're needed most, in moments of extreme pressure and critical survival. The same principle applies to any organization that must survive real challenges. Successful companies maintain clear power structures beneath their casual, modern veneers. Effective crisis response teams operate on command authority, not collaborative consensus. Functional emergency services run on absolute hierarchy, not democratic dialogue. This is not about being cruel, it's about being prepared. Because soft power is like a beautiful sports car, impressive in good conditions, useless in a storm. Hard power is like a tank, not elegant, not comfortable, but reliable exactly when you need it most. So I say to you, build your authority on foundations that will hold when tested. Understand that while soft power may make leadership more comfortable in easy times, it is hard power that ensures survival in hard times. For in the real world, the world of competition, crisis, and survival, authority must be built not for the conditions you want, but for the conditions you may face. There exists a profound truth that gentle souls find difficult to accept. Sometimes a single act of calculated severity can prevent 1,000 acts of chaos. This is the principle of strategic cruelty, not cruelty for its own sake, but cruelty deployed with surgical precision to establish or maintain necessary order. Let us be clear. We do not speak of sadism. We do not advocate for arbitrary violence. We speak instead of the careful, measured application of severity at critical moments when the stakes demand it, and the alternatives would ultimately create greater suffering. Consider the mathematics of power. A leader who refuses to act with severity when circumstances require it often causes more harm through their weakness than they would through decisive harshness. Their hesitation allows small problems to grow into catastrophes. Their softness encourages challenges that end in broader violence. Their reluctance to punish creates the very conditions that demand greater punishment later. Think of how this operates in practice. A military commander who hesitates to discipline a single insubordinate soldier may eventually watch that example destroy unit cohesion, leading to deaths in combat. A corporate leader who refuses to fire one toxic executive may ultimately watch that poison spread until the entire company fails. A parent who cannot bring themselves to enforce crucial boundaries may raise a child who brings destruction to themselves and others. This is the paradox of power. Sometimes mercy creates cruelty, while cruelty serves mercy. The key lies in understanding strategic cruelty's 4 principles. First, timing is everything. Strategic cruelty must be applied early, when the example will have maximum impact with minimum force. Wait too long, and you must use greater force to achieve the same effect. Second, the action must be proportional. Use exactly the force required. No more, no less. Excessive cruelty creates martyrs. Insufficient cruelty invites challenge. The precise application of necessary force creates respect. Third, the lesson must be clear. Strategic cruelty is not about revenge or emotional satisfaction. It is about sending an unmistakable message about consequences. Every such action should teach a lesson that prevents 100 similar transgressions. Fourth, the action must be impersonal. Strategic cruelty cannot appear arbitrary or driven by personal animosity. It must be seen as the natural, inevitable consequence of challenging necessary authority. Consider historical examples. A new emperor who executes a single conspirator publicly may prevent a dozen civil wars. A CEO who fires one executive dramatically for crossing ethical lines may preserve the integrity of an entire corporation. A teacher who expels one student for serious misconduct may maintain the discipline required for hundreds to learn. This is the mathematics of prevention. One calculated act of severity can prevent exponentially greater chaos. But understand this clearly. Strategic cruelty is like surgery. Used precisely, it heals. Used clumsily, it kills. The difference lies in timing. Strike too soon, you appear paranoid. Strike too late, you appear weak. Force. Use too much, you create resistance. Use too little, you invite defiance. Clarity. Make the lesson unclear, and you waste the pain. Personality. Make it personal, and you transform necessary severity into petty tyranny. This is why true strategic cruelty requires emotional control. It cannot be driven by anger, fear, or desire for revenge. It must be calculated, measured, and applied with the detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. Remember, the goal is not to punish, but to prevent, not to hurt, but to heal, not to satisfy emotional needs, but to serve necessary ends. So I say to you, learn the art of strategic cruelty. Understand that sometimes the kindest act a leader can perform is to be briefly, calculatedly severe. For in the real world, the leader who cannot be cruel when circumstances demand, it often creates the conditions for greater cruelty to flourish. For in the end, it is better to be severe once and create lasting order than to be gentle always and preside over perpetual chaos. In the wilderness of power, there are two creatures whose natures you must understand and embody. The lion, who cannot defend against snares, but can terrify wolves, and the fox, who cannot frighten wolves, but can recognize traps. Today, we explore why true power requires mastery of both natures. The lion in you must be capable of decisive force. When threats are direct, when challenges are open, when enemies gather at your gates, this is when you must roar, when your strength must be unquestioned, when your capacity for violence must be clear to all who would test it. But the fox in you must be equally developed. When threats are subtle, when challenges come wrapped in smiles, when enemies move in shadows, this is when you must be cunning, when your wit must be sharper than any sword, when your ability to detect and diffuse plots must be your shield. Consider how this duality manifests in practice. A corporate leader faces both open competitors who would destroy them and subtle internal rivals who would undermine them. The lion in them must be ready to crush direct challenges to their authority. The fox in them must sense betrayal before it ripens into threat. A military commander faces both enemy forces that must be met with strength and complex political machinations that must be navigated with cunning. The lion in them must inspire fear in their enemies. The fox in them must smell ambush in apparently innocent situations. Even in daily leadership, this duality proves crucial. When managing subordinates, the lion in you maintains discipline through the implicit threat of consequences. But the fox in you reads the subtle signs of discontent, the quiet stirrings of rebellion, the hidden currents of resistance. When negotiating with equals, the lion in you projects strength that demands respect. But the fox in you sees through deceptions, recognizes false promises, and positions you to win without fighting. This is why leaders who embody only one nature inevitably fail. The pure lion, all force and no cunning, falls into traps laid by cleverer rivals. They mistake every challenge for one that can be met with strength alone. They are predictable in their responses and thus easily manipulated by those who understand their nature. The pure fox, all cunning and no force, eventually faces challenges that cannot be solved through wit alone. They become known for their weakness in direct confrontation. They lose the respect that only demonstrated strength can maintain. But the leader who masters both natures, they become truly formidable. They know when to show force and when to show flexibility. They understand which threats require the lion's roar and which demand the fox's cunning. They can shift between natures seamlessly, keeping rivals and subordinates uncertain of their response. This duality must be cultivated deliberately. The lion in you must train for strength, not just physical strength, but strength of will, strength of purpose, strength of command. You must be capable of decisive action when action is required. The fox in you must develop perception, the ability to read subtle signs, to understand hidden motivations, to see traps before they close. You must be capable of detecting and deflecting threats before they require the lion's strength to combat. Both natures must be genuine. Your capacity for force must be real, not bluster. Your cunning must be proven, not merely claimed. Your ability to shift between natures must be natural, not forced. This is why the most dangerous leaders are those who appear reasonable until crossed, diplomatic until challenged, flexible until tested. They have mastered the art of showing exactly the nature the situation demands. So I say to you, develop both the lion and the fox within you. Understand that true power requires both the ability to fight and the wisdom to avoid fighting when possible. Train both your strength and your cunning, for in the real world of power, you will face both wolves that must be terrified and snares that must be detected. And only by mastering both natures can you hope to survive and thrive in the dangerous game of command. When society's structures fail, when the thin veneer of civilization peels away, when the comfortable illusions of modern life shatter. This is when you will truly understand why fear is the only reliable foundation for order. Let us explore why this principle becomes most crucial precisely when everything else fails. Consider what happens in genuine collapse scenarios. The power grid fails, supply chains break, law enforcement disappears, banking systems collapse. All the invisible supports that maintain civil society suddenly vanish. In these moments, how do groups maintain cohesion? How do leaders enforce decisions? How does order persist when chaos beckons? Not through democratic consensus, not through emotional appeal, not through moral persuasion, through fear. This is not theory, this is proven reality. Look at how order maintains itself in prison camps when official authority breaks down. Study how emergency response teams function. In disaster zones, examine how military units survive when cut off from command structure. The pattern is consistent. Groups that maintain internal discipline through clear consequences survive. Groups that rely on cooperative spirit dissolve. Why? Because collapse scenarios strip away the luxury of choice. When food must be rationed, you cannot rely on voluntary sharing. When security requires absolute silence, you cannot hope for willing compliance. When survival demands immediate action, you cannot wait for group consensus. This is why prepper groups that build on community, spirit, and shared values often fracture under real pressure. They have no enforcement mechanism beyond social approval, and social approval means nothing when survival is at stake. Consider the mathematics of collapse. In normal times, a group can absorb some level of disobedience. Resources are plentiful, enough to cover waste. Time is abundant enough to resolve conflicts through discussion. Mistakes can be corrected without fatal consequences. But in collapse scenarios, margins disappear. One person taking more than their share of supplies can doom the group. One member breaking security protocols can compromise everyone's safety. One moment of disobedience can mean the difference between group survival and group extinction. This is why fear becomes not just useful, but necessary. It provides the only enforcement mechanism reliable enough to ensure survival-critical compliance. But understand this clearly. We speak not of terror, but of constructive fear. Fear of losing access to group resources. Fear of being expelled from group protection. Fear of facing collapse scenarios alone. This fear must be systematic, built into group protocols and procedures. Predictable, clear consequences for clear violations. Impersonal, based on group survival, not leaders' whims. Proportional, matched to the severity of the infraction. The most effective collapse-ready groups understand this instinctively. They establish clear hierarchies before they're needed. They build enforcement mechanisms while they have time. They test compliance systems before real pressures hit. They ensure everyone understands the consequences of disobedience. This preparation pays dividends when real collapse occurs. While other groups fragment under pressure, they maintain cohesion. While others waste critical time on discussion, they act decisively. While others suffer from internal theft and discord, they preserve resources. While others fall to external threats, they present unified defense. So I say to you, if you're preparing for collapse scenarios, prepare your enforcement mechanisms first. Understand that when everything falls apart, fear will be your most reliable tool for maintaining order. Build your systems now, establish clear hierarchies, define explicit consequences, create enforcement protocols, test compliance mechanisms. For in the end, when collapse comes, the groups that survive will not be the ones with the most resources, the best locations, or the most advanced technology. They will be the ones who understood this fundamental truth. In chaos, fear is the only reliable foundation for order. The military understands truths about human nature and leadership that the civilian world has forgotten or chosen to ignore. These are not comfortable truths. They do not align with modern sensibilities about management and motivation, but they have been proven in the crucible of combat, where theories fail and only reality survives. Let us examine these forgotten truths. First, discipline cannot be built on positive reinforcement alone. The military knows that humans require both the carrot and the stick, and that in crucial moments, fear of the stick proves more reliable than hope for the carrot. Watch how basic training operates. It breaks down civilian individuality not through inspiration, but through fear. It builds unit cohesion not through team-building exercises, but through shared hardship. It creates discipline not through positive motivation, but through immediate consequences. The results speak for themselves. In mere weeks, it transforms civilians into soldiers capable of functioning under extreme pressure. Second, hierarchy is not a social construct. It is a survival mechanism. The military chain of command exists, not because of tradition, but because it works. It enables instant decision-making when delay means death, clear accountability when confusion means chaos, immediate action when discussion means defeat. Consider how this contrasts with civilian organizations. They waste time seeking consensus when decisions are urgent. They dilute accountability through shared responsibility. They paralyze action through excessive consultation. Third, fear is a more reliable motivator than inspiration. The military understands that in extreme situations, fear of letting down your unit drives performance more than desire for praise. Fear of consequences ensures discipline more than hope of reward. Fear of failure motivates preparation more than anticipation of success. This is why military units maintain discipline through clear punishment systems rather than reward schemes. They know which motivator works under real pressure. Fourth, group cohesion requires external pressure. The military creates unity not through team-building workshops, but through shared hardship that bonds through common suffering, external threats that unite through common fear, rigid standards that bind through common struggle. Civilian organizations try to build teams through artificial exercises. The military builds them through real challenges and real consequences. Fifth, leadership requires distance. The military knows that leaders cannot be friends with their subordinates. This distance is necessary because hard decisions require emotional detachment. Respect requires some degree of fear. Authority requires professional distance. Civilian managers try to be friends with their teams. Military leaders understand that such familiarity undermines command. Sixth, training must be harder than the real challenge. The military deliberately makes training more demanding than combat because it builds confidence through proven capability. It makes real challenges seem manageable by comparison. It reveals weaknesses before they become fatal. Civilian organizations make training comfortable. The military makes it harder than reality. Seventh, unit survival outweighs individual comfort. The military understands that individual preferences must yield to group needs. Personal feelings cannot override operational requirements. Comfort is always secondary to capability. This seems harsh to civilian sensibilities, but it keeps military units alive when circumstances turn lethal. Eighth, respect and fear are inseparable. The military knows that. True respect contains an element of fear. Leadership without fear becomes mere friendship. Authority without consequences becomes mere influence. Civilian organizations try to earn respect without inspiring fear. The military knows these elements cannot be separated. So I say to you, study what the military knows. Understand these truths that have been proven in the harshest testing grounds. Stop trying to reinvent leadership principles that have been written in blood. For in the end, when circumstances turn severe, when pressure becomes extreme, when survival is at stake, military leadership principles prove themselves while civilian theories fail. In times of peace and plenty, love-based leadership appears. Beautiful. It promises harmony without hierarchy, cooperation without coercion, achievement without authority. It seems to offer a more evolved, more humane way to guide human groups toward their goals. Then, crisis strikes, and this beautiful theory shatters against the hard rock of reality. Let us examine the anatomy of this collapse through the tale of two captains. The first builds his authority on being loved. He creates a family atmosphere on his ship. He prioritizes crew comfort, validates feelings, seeks consensus in decisions. His crew adores him in calm seas. The second builds his authority on being feared. He maintains strict discipline, enforces clear hierarchies, demands immediate obedience. His crew respects him, but does not love him. Now watch what happens when the storm hits. The first captain's crew, accustomed to comfort and consultation, falls into chaos. When he gives urgent orders, they want to discuss alternatives. When he demands immediate action, they question his judgment. When he tries to enforce discipline, they feel betrayed by their family member. The second captain's crew, trained in discipline, responds instantly to commands. They act without question when seconds matter. They maintain order under pressure because order was always their foundation. This pattern repeats across all crisis scenarios. In corporate collapses, love-based leaders find themselves paralyzed. Their attempt to maintain harmony prevents necessary cuts. Their desire to be understood slows crucial decisions. Their fear of appearing harsh destroys their ability to take decisive action. In emergency situations, love-based leaders watch their authority evaporate. Their teams, accustomed to democratic process, waste precious time seeking consensus. Their subordinates, used to having their feelings validated, resist urgent commands that feel uncomfortable. In survival scenarios, love-based leaders often doom their groups. Their inability to enforce resource rationing leads to waste. Their reluctance to punish violations leads to breakdown. Their commitment to collective decision-making leads to fatal delays. Why does this collapse occur? Because love-based leadership rests on fundamentally flawed assumptions about human nature. It assumes that people will choose group interest over self-interest when pressured. It assumes that consensus produces better decisions than command in crisis. It assumes that emotional bonds will hold stronger than fear of consequences. It assumes that trust based on affection is more reliable than compliance based on authority. Crisis proves all these assumptions false. Self-interest emerges, strongest precisely when resources are scarcest. Quick, decisive command outperforms group discussion when time is critical. Fear of consequences motivates more reliably than bonds of affection under pressure. Authority based on power holds firm, while authority based on love crumbles. This is why love-based leadership is ultimately irresponsible. It fails to prepare groups for real challenges. It creates expectations that cannot be met in crisis. It builds structures that collapse when most needed. It promotes values that become liabilities under pressure. The tragedy is that many love-based leaders genuinely believe in their approach. They aren't weak or naive. They're idealistic. They want to believe that humans can be led through pure positive motivation. But this idealism becomes fatal when reality intrudes. When the ship is sinking, you cannot hold a team meeting. When the building is burning, you cannot validate feelings. When survival is at stake, you cannot maintain democratic process. So I say to you, build your authority on foundations that will hold in storm and calm alike. Understand that while love-based leadership may feel good in easy times, it is fear-based leadership that saves lives in hard times. For in the end, when crisis strikes, when chaos threatens, when survival hangs in the balance, it is better to be the captain whose crew fears enough to obey than the captain whose crew loves too much to listen. The principles of power have not changed in the digital age. They have merely found new expressions. Today, we examine how modern entities, governments, corporations, and platforms have mastered the art of algorithmic fear to rule without apparent force. Consider how the most powerful digital entities maintain control. They do not need physical chains, they have data. They do not need visible weapons, they have algorithms. They do not need traditional fear, they have digital anxiety. This is power evolved to its most sophisticated form. Watch how modern platforms maintain order. They don't explicitly threaten, they simply make you visible. They don't directly punish, they adjust your reach. They don't openly censor, they curate your reality. This is fear reimagined. For a digital age, fear of being deplatformed rather than imprisoned, fear of being shadow banned rather than silenced, fear of being algorithmically buried rather than physically constrained. The genius lies in the subtlety. Consider how digital power operates. Social media platforms don't need to declare their power. Users internalize it. They self-censor, self-regulate, self-limit, all without direct coercion. The fear of algorithmic punishment creates more effective control than any explicit threat. Search engines don't need to ban information. They simply adjust its visibility. The fear of being pushed to the 10th page of results is more effective than outright censorship. After all, in the digital world, invisibility is death, payment. Processors don't need to freeze accounts. They just hint at the possibility. The mere threat of financial exclusion creates more compliance than actual enforcement ever could. This is power refined to its purest form. No visible oppression to rally against, no clear enemy to resist, no obvious chains to break. Watch how modern corporations maintain digital discipline. They track every keystroke, every click, every interaction. They measure productivity in real time, creating constant performance anxiety. They implement surveillance systems that make traditional oversight seem crude. The fear this creates is more sophisticated than traditional workplace fear. Not fear of being fired, but fear of being gradually marginalized. Not fear of direct confrontation, but fear of invisible evaluation. Not fear of immediate punishment, but fear of algorithmic determination of fate. Government surveillance has evolved similarly. They don't need informants. They have data collection. They don't need watchtowers. They have digital tracking. They don't need physical presence. They have algorithmic prediction. The fear this generates is more pervasive than traditional state fear. Not fear of the secret police, but fear of being flagged by algorithms. Not fear of midnight raids, but fear of digital profile assessment. Not fear of physical surveillance, but fear of data pattern analysis. But understand this clearly. These new mechanisms of control are not weaker. They are stronger. They achieve through subtle pressure what former systems achieved through brute force. Consider the advantages. Traditional fear can create martyrs. Digital fear creates confusion. Traditional oppression can be photographed. Algorithmic oppression is invisible. Traditional control can be resisted. Digital control is often welcomed as convenience. This is why modern power structures prefer algorithmic fear. It's more efficient than physical coercion. It's more scalable than traditional surveillance. It's more acceptable than visible oppression. So I say to you, understand these new mechanisms of control. Recognize that fear has not disappeared in the digital age. It has evolved. The principle remains the same, but the implementation has become more sophisticated. For in the end, whether through physical force or algorithmic control, the fundamental truth remains. Fear is the foundation of order. The only difference is how elegantly it can be applied. Behind the public face of emergency management lies a darker truth. Government disaster response is built not on faith in human cooperation, but on the certainty of human panic. Today we explore why authorities prepare not to comfort the masses, but to control them. Consider how FEMA and similar agencies actually plan for disasters. They don't stockpile resources trusting in orderly distribution. They don't design systems assuming civilian cooperation. They don't build protocols expecting rational behavior. Instead, they prepare for the reality they know will come: panic-driven hoarding of supplies, breakdown of social order, mass hysteria, and chaos. This is not cynicism. It is hard-earned wisdom. Every major disaster has taught the same lesson. When systems fail, humans revert to primitive survival behavior. The thin veneer of civilization peels away within days, sometimes hours. Watch how government emergency protocols actually operate. They prioritize control over comfort. They emphasize containment over care. They focus on constraint over cooperation. This reveals what authorities actually know about human nature in crisis. That people will not share resources voluntarily, that social order will not maintain itself. That panic will spread faster than any pathogen. Consider their actual priorities in disaster response. First, establish control. Second, contain panic. Third, maintain authority. Only then, provide aid. This ordering is not arbitrary. It comes from understanding that without the first three, the fourth becomes impossible. Look at how emergency powers are actually structured. They don't rely on civilian cooperation. They supersede it. They don't request compliance. They demand it. They don't suggest, they command. This reveals the government's true assessment of human behavior in crisis. That persuasion will fail. That cooperation will collapse. That force will become necessary. Study how emergency resources are actually allocated, not based on need alone, not based on fairness, not based on equality, but based on control potential, strategic value, authority, maintenance. This is why certain areas get resources first, not because their need is greatest, not because their population is largest, but because their stability is most crucial for maintaining order. Examine how information is actually managed in crises, not to maximize transparency, not to ensure full disclosure, not to promote understanding, but to control panic, direct behavior, maintain authority. This is why government communications in crisis often seem limited. They know that full information often increases panic. They understand that truth can sometimes undermine control. They recognize that authority requires information management. Consider how security forces are actually deployed, not primarily to help civilians, not mainly to provide aid, not mostly to offer comfort, but to maintain order, prevent looting, enforce compliance. This reveals the government's true priorities: control first, aid second, comfort last. So I say to you, study how governments actually prepare for disaster, not their public statements, but their actual protocols, not their comforting assurances, but their real preparations. For in the end, they know what history has proven, that in crisis, fear is not just useful, it is necessary. That control is not just helpful, it is essential. That authority must be maintained not through cooperation, but through force. Because when disaster strikes, when chaos threatens, when order collapses, it is better to be feared than loved. This is not just a preference, it is a necessity for survival. In the realm of survival groups, there exists a critical distinction between those who lead and those who merely coordinate. Today, we explore why your prepper group needs a prince, not a facilitator, a commander, not a committee chair. The fundamental error most prepper groups make is believing that democratic process will survive crisis. They structure their organizations like peacetime social clubs. Everyone has a say. Decisions require consensus. Leadership rotates based on expertise. This is a blueprint for extinction. Consider what happens when real crisis strikes. Democratic groups waste precious time seeking consensus. Rotating leadership creates fatal gaps in command. Shared decision-making paralyzes rapid response. This is why effective prepper groups must be structured like principalities, not parliaments. Clear, singular leadership. Absolute decision-making. Authority, unquestioned command in crisis. But understand this clearly. Being a prince is not about ego or power for its own sake. It is about creating a structure that ensures group survival when chaos strikes. Watch how this principle manifests in real crisis situations. The group with a clear leader makes immediate decisions about resource allocation. The democratic group debates while supplies dwindle. The principality survives while the commune starves. This is why your authority must be established before crisis hits. In calm times, build your command structure. In quiet times, establish your protocols. In peace times, enforce your hierarchy, because when disaster strikes, it will be too late to assert authority. You must already be the prince, not struggling to become one. Consider the key elements of princely leadership in a prepper context. Resource control. All supplies flow through central authority distribution, based on strategic necessity, not equality. Strict inventory control and usage protocols, security protocols, clear chain of command, immediate response capabilities, no decision by committee in emergencies, membership management, strict entry requirements, clear expulsion procedures, hierarchical structure with defined roles, training, and discipline, regular drills without debate, consequences for non-compliant standards maintained through authority, not consensus. This structure seems harsh to modern sensibilities, but it is harsh precisely because reality is harsh. Survival situations do not care about democratic values or hurt feelings. Watch how this plays out in group dynamics, when resources must be rationed. The prince decides based on group survival. No debate, no appeal, no exception. Clear consequences. For violation when security is threatened. Immediate command activation. Swift, decisive response. No time wasted on discussion when membership must be culled. Clear authority to remove threats. No committee approval needed. Swift execution of decision. This is why true prepper leadership requires the will to command without consensus, the strength to enforce without apology, the wisdom to decide without debate. Some will object, but this creates resentment. This breeds resistance. Better to have resentment than extinction. Better to face resistance than dissolution. Better to be feared than to be extinct. Consider how this authority must be maintained. Regular displays of command capability. Consistent enforcement of standards. Swift response to any challenge, because authority, like any muscle, must be exercised. To remain strong. Regular drills reinforce command structure. Consistent discipline maintains order. Swift consequences preserve respect. So I say to you, if you lead a prepper group, stop trying to be everyone's friend. Stop seeking consensus when you should be giving orders. Stop acting like a peasant when you must be a prince. Build your authority now. Establish clear command structures, implement strict protocols, enforce real consequences, for in the end, when crisis strikes, when chaos reigns, when survival hangs in the balance, it is better to be the prince who commands than the peasant who begs for cooperation. There exists a dangerous delusion in modern organizational thinking, the belief that consensus-based decision-making works in emergencies. This myth has killed more people in crisis situations than any external threat. Today we strip away this comfortable lie and examine the lethal reality of democratic process in emergency response. Consider what actually happens in real emergency situations. A building is burning. The democratic leader calls a meeting to discuss evacuation routes. A ship is sinking. The consensus-seeking captain polls the crew about which lifeboats to launch. A security breach is detected. The collaborative manager forms a committee to evaluate responses. By the time the vote is counted, everyone is dead. This is not hyperbole. This is the mathematical reality of emergency response. Crisis situations operate on exponential timescales. Every second of delay multiplies the danger. Discussion time kills as surely as any threat. Watch how this plays out in actual emergency scenarios. When fire spreads, each minute of debate doubles the affected area. When water rises, each moment of discussion doubles the flood damage. When threats advance, each second of deliberation doubles the danger. This is why effective emergency response requires instant command activation, immediate decision execution, zero discussion time. The myth of consensus kills in multiple ways: through direct delay of critical actions, through diffusion of responsibility, through degradation of command authority. Consider the psychological factors that make consensus lethal in emergencies. Fear paralyzes rational discussion. Panic prevents clear thinking. Stress destroys collaborative capability. This is why emergency services operate on command authority. Firefighters don't vote on tactics. Paramedics don't debate treatments. SWAT teams don't seek consensus. They operate on a simple principle: one leader, one decision, one action. Watch how this principle saves lives. The command leader makes an immediate decision. The order transmits instantly through clear hierarchy. Action begins before debate can form. Compare this to consensus-based response. The group begins discussion. Various opinions are shared. Debate consumes critical time. By the time agreement is reached, the fire has spread beyond control. The patient has deteriorated beyond recovery. The threat has evolved beyond containment. This is why emergency protocols must be pre-established without debate, activated without discussion, executed without question. Some will object. But what if the leader makes the wrong decision? A wrong decision executed immediately is better than a right decision executed too late. A clear command that proves incorrect is better than unclear consensus that proves fatal. A swift error that can be corrected is better than a perfect plan that arrives after disaster. Consider how this principle applies to your own emergency preparations. Do you have clear command protocols? Can decisions be made instantly? Will orders be followed without debate? If not, you are preparing to fail. Because when crisis strikes, there is no time for discussion. There is no room for debate. There is no space for democracy. So I say to you, strip away this dangerous myth of consensus in emergencies. Understand that when seconds count, discussion kills. Build command structures that can operate without debate. For in the end, when disaster strikes, when chaos erupts, when survival hangs by a thread, it is better to have a decisive commander who might be wrong than a deliberative committee that will definitely be too late. There exists a principle that most leaders either never learn or learn too late. Shared fear is a stronger binding agent than shared love. Today we explore how the strategic use of fear, both external and internal, creates stronger group cohesion than any team-building exercise ever could. Consider two forces that can unite a group. Love draws people together through positive emotion. Fear binds them together through survival necessity. When pressure hits, which bond holds stronger? Watch how this plays out in real group dynamics. Team bound by friendship fractures under resource pressure. A team bound by shared fear of external threats stays unified. A group united by positive goals dissolves when challenged. A group united by fear of common enemies grows stronger. This is not theory. This is observable reality in every successful group structure. Military units bond through shared fear of failure. Elite organizations unite through fear of exclusion. Survival groups cohere through fear of external chaos. The principle operates on three levels: external fear, the threat outside the group; internal fear, the consequences of betraying the group; systemic fear, the cost of failing group standards. Let us examine each. External fear as unifying force creates clear us versus them dynamics, emphasizes group dependency for survival, makes internal conflicts seem trivial. Consider how this manifests. Prepper group united against societal collapse. A military unit bonded against enemy threat. A corporate team unified against market competitors. The external threat becomes the glue that holds the group together. Internal fear as behavioral control establishes clear consequences for betrayal, creates predictable compliance patterns, maintains group discipline without constant enforcement. Watch how this operates. Clear expulsion protocols for violators, defined penalties for breaking group rules, systematic consequences for disloyalty. The fear of losing group protection becomes self-regulating. Systemic fear, as performance driver, sets high standards through consequences, maintains excellence through pressure, ensures consistent performance through anxiety. Observe how this functions. Elite military units maintain standards through fear of failure. High-performance teams drive excellence through fear of exclusion. Survival groups ensure readiness through fear of unpreparedness. The system itself generates the pressure that maintains quality. But understand this clearly. This is not about creating terror. It's about strategic use of fear as a binding agent. The fear must be controlled, not random or excessive, purposeful, tied to group survival, constructive, driving toward excellence. The implementation requires clear threat identification, consistent. Consequence systems, controlled pressure application. Some will object, but fear creates negative energy. It damages morale. This misunderstands the nature of productive fear. It's not about terror, but about respect for consequences. It's not about panic, but about sustained alertness. It's not about paralysis, but about motivated action. Consider how this principle manifests in nature. Wolf packs unite through shared fear of larger predators. Herd animals bond through common fear of threats. Even human societies cohere most strongly when facing shared dangers. This is why effective leaders maintain awareness of external threats, establish clear internal consequences, create systematic performance pressure. They understand that comfort breeds complacency, security breeds weakness, safety breeds vulnerability. So I say to you, learn to use fear as the binding agent it is. Understand that while love may make groups feel good, fear makes them survive. Build your unity not on fragile positive emotions, but on the solid foundation of shared survival necessity. For in the end, when pressure hits, when challenges come, when survival is at stake, it is better to be bound by the steel chains of fear than the silk threads of love. There exists a fundamental truth that modern leadership theory tries desperately to deny. Real authority does not require kindness. Today we explore how to build and maintain command through pure strength, without the crutch of emotional appeal or the weakness of seeking approval. Consider the foundation of true authority, not charisma, which fades, not kindness, which weakens, not charm, which deceives, but pure, unmistakable strength. This strength manifests in three forms: decisional strength, the power to make hard choices without hesitation; consequential strength, the power to enforce decisions without mercy; emotional strength, the power to remain unmoved by others' feelings. Watch how this operates in practice when resources must be allocated. No explanation needed, no feelings considered, no appeals entertained when discipline must be enforced. Swift execution, consistent application, zero tolerance for excuses when opposition arises, immediate response, overwhelming force, complete resolution. This is how real authority maintains itself: through clarity of command, through certainty of consequence, through consistency of control. Consider the elements of authority without kindness: voice control, deep measured tone, no emotional variation, command presence. In every word, physical presence, controlled movements, dominant posture, unwavering gaze decision, execution, immediate action, no second guessing, no regret display. This projects the strength that creates natural authority. People follow, not because they want to, but because they sense they must. Not through choice, but through instinct. Watch how this manifests in group dynamics. When the strong leader enters, conversations stop, postures straighten, attention focuses, not because of rank or title, but because of pure projected power. This authority requires maintenance, regular displays of strength, consistent enforcement of will-swift response to any challenge, because authority, like muscle, grows stronger through use. Each decision reinforces. Command, each consequence builds respect. Each challenge met increases power. Some will object, but this creates fear rather than loyalty. Exactly. Fear lasts. Loyalty changes. Consider the advantages of authority through strength. No need to explain decisions. No requirement to build consensus. No waste of energy on emotional management. This creates pure efficiency of command. Orders given. Action taken, results achieved. The key elements of maintaining this authority: never explain decisions, never justify actions, never show uncertainty, because true authority does not need to be understood, does not require agreement, does not seek approval. So, I say to you, build your authority on pure strength. Stop diluting your command with unnecessary kindness. Stop weakening your position with emotional appeals. Cultivate, instead, the strength to decide without doubt, the power to act without hesitation, the will to command without compromise. For in the end, when authority is needed most, when command must be absolute, when control must be maintained, it is better to be strong without kindness than kind without strength. Power must not only be possessed, it must be displayed. Today we explore how rituals, symbols, and calculated demonstrations of authority create the theater of command that turns raw power into lasting control. Consider how lasting power structures maintain their authority, not through force alone, not through threat alone, not through fear alone, but through the careful cultivation of power's visible manifestations. Watch how this operates in successful command structures. Military formations display hierarchy through precise ceremonial movements, distinct rank insignia, formal reporting protocols. Religious organizations maintain control through sacred rituals, symbolic vestments, hierarchical ceremonies. Even corporate power manifests through corner office positioning, executive floor access, ceremonial board meetings. These are not mere decorations. They are the machinery of authority. Rituals reinforce hierarchy. Symbols cement status displays, demonstrate dominance. Consider the key elements of power display. Physical arrangements, command position elevated, subordinates positioned lower space. Organized to emphasize authority, ceremonial protocols. Formal reporting procedures, structured communication patterns, ritualized respect demonstrations, visual symbols, distinct leader marking, status indicators, authority emblems. These create the theater that transforms power into authority. Raw force becomes structured command. Basic fear becomes systemic respect. Simple control becomes natural order. Watch how this manifests in group psychology. When rituals are performed, roles become clearer. Hierarchy feels natural, authority seems right. When symbols are displayed, status becomes visible, power becomes tangible, command becomes real. When authority is demonstrated, compliance becomes automatic, obedience becomes instinctive, control becomes effortless. This is why effective power structures maintain regular ceremonies of command, consistent symbols of authority, calculated displays of control, because power must be not just held, but shown, not just possessed, but performed, not just owned, but displayed. Consider the elements of effective power display: timing, regular demonstrations, strategic moments, critical situations, scale, appropriate to authority level, matched to circumstance, proportional to need impact, clear message, lasting impression, unmistakable. Meaning, this creates the architecture of visible authority. Every action reinforces power. Every symbol strengthens control. Every ritual deepens command. Some will object, but this is just theater. Exactly. Because theater creates reality. Because performance becomes truth. Watch how this operates in nature. Animal dominance displays territorial marking rituals, status demonstration ceremonies. Human authority follows the same principles. Power must be seen to be real, authority must be shown to be believed, control must be displayed to be maintained. So I say to you, master the theater of command. Understand that power without performance loses half its force. Create the rituals, symbols, and displays that transform raw authority into natural order. For in the end, when control must be maintained, when authority must be preserved. When power must be perpetuated, it is better to be seen as powerful than to merely be powerful. The principles of power apply not only to nations and corporations, but to the smallest unit of sovereignty, the household. Today, we explore why your home must be treated as your kingdom, and why raising disciplined subjects serves better than nurturing entitled rebels. Consider the modern household crisis: parents who beg rather than command children, who negotiate rather than obey authority that dissolves rather than strengthens. This is the result of treating a kingdom as a democracy. Watch how this weakness manifests. Children questioning every instruction, teenagers demanding rather than earning, parents explaining rather than commanding. This is not parenting, it is abdication. The household must be structured like any effective power system. Clear hierarchy, unquestioned authority, swift consequences. Consider the elements of household command: spatial authority, command center established territory, clearly defined boundaries, strictly enforced temporal control, schedules maintained, routines enforced, time boundaries respected, resource management, supplies controlled, access regulated, distribution managed. This creates the framework of domestic power, not a space of negotiation, but a realm of command, not a democracy of equals, but a hierarchy of order. Watch how this manifests in practice. When instructions are given, immediate compliance expected, no debate entertained, no explanation required. When boundaries are tested, swift response delivered, clear consequences enforced, no appeals considered. When authority is challenged, immediate reassertion, overwhelming response, complete resolution. This is how household order maintains itself: through consistent command, through clear consequences, through controlled authority. Some will object, but this damages children's self-expression. Better disciplined strength than chaotic weakness, better controlled power than uncontrolled rebellion, better commanded success than democratic failure. Consider the advantages of household authority. Children learn real-world power structures. Family members understand clear boundaries. Order creates security and strength. This builds future leaders rather than future followers. They learn authority by experiencing it. They understand power by respecting it. They master command by obeying it. The key elements of household rule: voice, control, commands, not requests, directives, not suggestions, orders, not negotiations, physical presence, dominant posture, controlled movement, command presence, consequence system, clear penalties, swift execution, no exemptions. This creates natural domestic order. Children who understand hierarchy, teenagers who respect authority, family members who maintain discipline. Watch how this transforms family dynamics. Chaos becomes order. Rebellion becomes respect. Negotiation becomes compliance. The benefits manifest in multiple ways. Children develop stronger character. Teenagers learn real-world principles. Family unit maintains coherence. So I say to you, rule your household like the kingdom it is. Stop treating family authority as a democratic exercise. Build instead a realm of order, discipline, and strength. For in the end, when your children face the real world, when your family faces real challenges, when your household faces real threats, it is better to have raised disciplined subjects than entitled rebels. Mere possession of resources does not equate to power. Today we explore why preparedness must be personified, why stockpiles need sovereignty, and why readiness requires a ruler to make it real. Consider the fatal flaw in most preparedness plans: vast resources without clear command, detailed protocols without definite authority, complex systems without central control. This is preparation without power, storage without sovereignty. Watch how this weakness manifests in crisis. Stockpiles become sources of conflict. Resources create competition rather than cooperation. Preparations spawn chaos instead of control. Because power without a face is not power at all. The prepared must Become the prince, not just owner, but ruler, not just organizer, but commander, not just planner, but sovereign. Consider the elements of preparation authority, resource control, central command of supplies, regulated access protocols, strategic distribution, control security systems, clear defensive hierarchy, defined response protocols, commanded action plans, operational authority, decision sovereignty, implementation control, execution command. This transforms mere preparation into true power. Not just having resources, but commanding their use, not just owning supplies, but controlling their distribution. Watch how this manifests in crisis scenarios. When supplies must be rationed, one authority decides, no debate entertained, no appeals considered when security is threatened. Single command responds, clear orders given, swift action taken. When decisions are needed, authority speaks, others execute, results follow. This is how prepared power maintains itself, through visible command, through personal authority, through embodied control. Some will object, but shouldn't everyone have equal access? Study how this fails. Resources depleted through lack of control, supplies wasted through democratic distribution, preparation, destroyed through shared access. Consider instead the advantages of personified power, clear decision-making, swift response capability, effective resource management. This creates preparedness that survives. Resources protected through authority, supplies preserved through control, readiness maintained through command, the key elements of preparation sovereignty. Physical presence, visible authority, command presence, power projection. Operational control, direct oversight, personal management, immediate command, resource dominion. Complete control, absolute authority, total sovereignty. This establishes preparation hierarchy, not just storage but command center, not just supplies but strategic resources, not just readiness but ruling authority. Watch how this transforms preparation. Effectiveness. Chaos becomes order, conflict becomes compliance, competition becomes cooperation. The benefits manifest in survival. Resources preserved, supplies protected, readiness maintained. So, I say to you, make your preparedness a throne, not just a storehouse. Become not just prepared, but sovereign. Transform your readiness into rule. For in the end, when crisis strikes, when chaos reigns, when survival depends on control, it is better to be the prince of preparedness than merely its possessor. We have reached the end of our discourse on power. Yet, in truth, we stand only at the beginning of your journey toward true command. Let these final words serve not as conclusion, but as eternal principles to guide your rule. Remember first what we have learned about the nature of power, that fear outlasts love, that strength surpasses kindness, that command exceeds consensus. These are not theories to be debated, but truths proven in blood and time. Consider the fundamental principles we have explored on human nature. Men are inherently selfish. Loyalty lasts only until tested. Fear motivates more reliably than love on leadership. Command must be absolute authority, must be visible. Power must be demonstrated. On crisis, democracy dies in emergencies. Consensus kills in chaos. Command saves when seconds count. These principles remain constant across all domains. In households, where authority creates order. In groups, where hierarchy ensures survival. In organizations, where command enables action. In nations, where power preserves peace. We have learned why modern delusions fail. Gentle leadership collapses under pressure. Democratic process paralyzes decisive action. Shared authority dissolves when most needed, and why ancient wisdom endures. Clear hierarchy maintains order. Swift command preserves life. Strong authority enables survival. Remember the critical distinctions we have mastered between being feared and being hated, between necessary cruelty and wasteful sadism, between command presence and mere position. Understand what separates true princes from mere managers. Princes decide. Managers discuss, princes command. Managers suggest, princes rule. Managers administer, keep. Close these tools of power. The strategic use of fear. The theater of command. The rituals of authority never forget the fundamental equations. Love is a debt that grows. Fear is a wall that stands. Power is a force that rules. Maintain always these habits of command, regular displays of authority, consistent enforcement of will-swift response to any challenge. For these habits build the foundation of lasting power, not through temporary force, but through permanent presence, not through occasional strength, but through constant authority. Remember that true power requires the will to decide without doubt, the strength to act without hesitation, the force to rule without compromise. This is your inheritance as prince, not the weak leadership of modern theory, but the strong command of eternal truth, not the gentle guidance of current fashion, but the firm rule of proven principle. So I say to you one final time, cast aside the comfortable lies of democratic leadership. Embrace instead the hard truth of princely command. Forget the weak methods of consensus and collaboration. Master instead the strong arts of authority and rule. For in the end, when all else fails, when chaos threatens, when survival hangs in balance, it will not be the gentle, the kind, or the beloved who preserve order and ensure survival. It will be those who understood and embraced this timeless truth. It is better to be feared than loved. This is not preference. This is not opinion. This is not theory. This is the iron law of power. Remember it. Live it. Rule by it. For you are now one of the few who truly understand. Welcome to a different kind of strength. Welcome to a higher form of command. Welcome to the eternal art of power. Welcome, at last, to the truth of the prince.